Journalist of all things. Of all things. God. I feel like I've been the most fortunate man that I've ever heard of. I went through such a great deal of experiences then, and I've been able to serve the country nonstop since. I've been the nominee of the Republican Party. You know, it always intrigues me a little bit, Neil, when they say that McCain is angry. Look, I get angry when I see injustice. I get angry when I see things like this pork that I hope we're going to talk about. But look, I am so happy to be in the arena, and I'm so happy to be able to serve. I can't tell you how grateful I am to been able to serve this country, and maybe not always the best, but I sure have tried and enjoyed every minute of it.
Hi, I'm Greg Gutfeld with Tammy Bruce, Juan Williams, Brian Kilmeade, and she skis in a sugar bowl, Dana Perino, The Five. Life is all about holes. You spend your life trying to fit into one, but that's the last thing you should want, because when you die, trust me, you'll fit. No matter how round a peg you are, eventually you go nicely into a rectangular hole. It's your job to do what John McCain did. Never willingly fit. Never lie down and quit. Make a fuss. Make everyone work harder. In fact, you can measure a life by the size of the hole needed to accommodate it. Make sure yours is McCain-sized. There are people whose exit leaves a Grand Canyon-sized space that can never truly be filled. Senator McCain left that space. And while condolences may often feel trite, they can help fill that space, especially when there are millions of them. Senator McCain was foremost an independent thinker, a round peg in the world capital of square holes. He owned his thoughts, critics be damned. His experiences taught him to shrug off stuff that would have left us in tears. 5.5 years in a prison camp will do that to you. And that's real diversity. He was feisty, funny, and real. We need a good John McCain, and not just every generation, but every day. Somebody who reminds us that we don't all have to act the same, and who knows that there is a difference between a good idea and the latest idea. The earth is covered in cemeteries, endless green acres of rectangular holes. There's one near you and in your future. But if there's an army of round pegs, filling square holes won't be easy. In life, be a John McCain. Be a little less predictable tomorrow than you were today. Realize that politics is only a small part of life, not life itself. Be the round peg that refuses to fit in. Dana, I heard you earlier talk about John McCain when the news came out. I just want to get your thoughts on, I don't know, his passing. And
well, I didn't know him until after 2001. I came to the Bush White House after 9/11, and anytime that John McCain was around, it was a joyous time. He's actually, he could be quite cantankerous. And you will find there were many people in Washington who got, you know, their heads ripped off by him, but they always respected him. He was a joy to have as an ally, and could be a really tough person if he wasn't on your side.
Right.
But he commanded such respect that you would have to listen to him. One of the big fights, or I shouldn't say it was a fight, but a disagreement was about enhanced interrogation techniques in the wake of the war on terror and 9/11. And he felt so strongly, and you couldn't disagree. I mean, obviously, he had gone through it.
Right.
He knew what he was talking about. And so I remember those fights. But the other thing that I remember, too, is because I wasn't there on the 2000 campaign, I only knew John McCain as a friend to George W. Bush and an ally. and as I learned more about how difficult and tough that primary and bitter that primary was when George W. Bush finally wins in South Carolina over McCain, that what a remarkable level of forgiveness happens between adversaries, that then they can go on to work. And then as a staffer, that's really great, because then you can work with their staff and there's no bitterness, there's no recriminations. What I've really enjoyed in the past 2 days is reading stories that I didn't know.
Yeah.
And a few of them having to do with all the things that I really loved about him, especially the freedom fighting, his belief that America was a force for good in the world, and that he would never, ever during recess would he go and take a vacation. He always went to see the troops or to visit somebody who needed America's help. And obviously, he will be missed. He's a man of principle. He evokes strong emotions in people.
Definitely.
Nobody's neutral.
No. It's so true. Brian, I don't know if you had any personal dealings with him.
Non-stop.
Yes.
Yeah.
Feel free to make some up.
Right. No,
Yes.
that's true. No, but they're all based on a true story. And here's the thing. It's a little like covering sports. When you first break in at 22, you have the worst mic flag there is. You're in the worst station at the worst time.
Yep.
And you walk into a locker room and they treat you just like your mic flag. So you're not on a network. With John McCain, he treated everyone equal. He made people seem important but not patronizing. He would come on to deliver. He had something to say every day. And I'm wondering, it seemed like there's only 5 people working in the Senate. On every major issue,
Yes.
not only does he have an opinion,
True.
there's a problem in Syria. There's an unrest. So next thing you know, he is in Syria at 78 years old, meeting with the Free Syrian Army. There's a problem in Ukraine. There's an insurrection. Well, it's 10 degrees below zero. He is sitting there on a stage in the Ukraine, and they're saying, John McCain will come on with you in the morning because they're 12 hours ahead of time. I'm saying this is unbelievable. The other thing I would keep in mind with John McCain, which I thought was fantastic, he sincerely admitted when he was wrong. The Keating 5, I blew it. He always regretted. I don't think this is wrong, but he regretted the confession they beat out of him in the big picture. He also, I also think that when it came to the collapsing of the economy, I think that at one point he lost to Barack Obama. Barack Obama calmly picked up the phone and talked to Hank Paulson, said, what's going on? Where John McCain suspended his campaign and got angry. In retrospect, he says, you know, I could have handled that better. It's kind of cool to think that you could be that important, admit you have wrong, and still forge straight ahead.
Juan, you must have interviewed him a number of times in your career. Any experiences that strike you?
Well, he could be really angry. He could get angry. I can tell you that. You know, that's not a joke. John McCain would be furious with me at times.
What for what? What?
Well, I remember the one that really stands out was in 2007. He was losing in the Republican primaries. And the question was, why is he carrying on? And I would ask that publicly on Special Report. I'd say, you know, I don't see why McCain bothers to stay in this race. And he just... Well, he did not react well, and he especially didn't react well when he came back and won. And he loved the idea that he would stick it to me that say, hey, you're supposed to be so smart about politics. So, I mean, that's the way he felt about it. That's fine. But you know what strikes me is that through it all, anger or whatever, was the sense of honor. And, you know people in the military, and the rarity of John McCain is that his granddad and his dad were both admirals. And then he goes to the U.S. Naval Academy in Annapolis, which is where he will be buried. And he's not an outstanding student, but he is a dedicated person. And when he goes to war, he's a dedicated person. I think he's the kind of person, based on the honor that he displayed as a politician, that I would want at my back if I'm under fire. And when you saw John McCain's statement, the statement that he issued knowing that he was about to die, he talked about American ideals, Greg, in terms of this is a country based on an idea, not on blood and soil. And he spoke with a depth that I don't hear from politicians about what real patriotism is. That, you know, politicians are always glad to wrap themselves in the flag and patriot. Not John McCain, and he could have done it more easily than any of them, because he really was, as Dana said, in a prison camp and tortured. I'm not saying he was just held, tortured, and displayed to me what was the greatest example of honor that I can think of as somebody I know, which is not to allow yourself to be freed, because the enemy knows that your dad is in charge of the troops, right?
Right.
And you're not going to let yourself be freed as a propaganda statement and leave your brothers behind.
Yep.
I don't think there's any higher tribute that I could give to John McCain than to recount that story today.
No, it's an amazing story, Tammy.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people watching and a lot of the people listening to my radio show have serious disagreements politically, obviously, with Senator McCain. And we've expressed those, and there's going to be time in the future to have those critiques. This is a time, though, to reflect on somebody, and all of us really, more than just what we see necessarily on television, more than in one moment that reflects something and who someone is and what they've contributed within the larger context. And his final statement, I think, says something very appropriate for all of us across the spectrum about not surrendering, right? About what really matters. And that's a message, especially for Trump supporters, that they can learn from. That no matter what's going on, that you continue on with what matters to you. That you can, none of us are going to get out of this alive, right? We're going to hopefully have a wonderful moment at the end where we can think about what mattered, if we did what we could, in every single way. And that is what I think all of us are trying to do. And he also mentioned, of course, the thing that gave him his strength. And I worked on that campaign briefly in a peripheral way in 2008. The difference was his family, his wife, and his daughter, Megan, who I got to know a little bit. And that, of course, was just a foundation for him, I think, that makes a huge difference for every politician, for all of us who do these things. And, of course, in the future, there's going to be much more critique, discussion about his legacy and the nature of what he's been able to accomplish, the things he's done when it comes to legislation, and how we move forward from this. But I think ultimately it's about sticking with your principles, not being bullied away from them, continuing on to help make this country stronger and better. And I think we're in a good position doing that.
All right. Well, up next, Geraldo Rivera takes us inside the opioid crisis in America with brand new footage of a major drug investigation. Stick around.
Watch TV.